For today's review, we are looking at the Jack-specific Shadow figure from the Sonic 3 movie, and before I talk about the figure, let's take a quick look at the packaging that he comes in. And of course, it is the standard packaging that we have seen before. On the front side, you do have your cast of characters from this movie. On the back side, you have an image of the action figure in a pose, and it does say 22 points of articulation, which is not bad for a 5-inch scale figure. And on the bottom, you do have the other figures from this wave. And of course, up top, there is a read-up, which I will read. Shadow is a fierce and mysterious foe who is determined to accomplish his goals and won't let anything stand in his way. Not a bad description for the character. That's pretty accurate to who he is. And that is the packaging. And taking a closer look at Shadow here, I really love the overall execution of how this figure turned out. And let's talk about the details that really does make this figure shine. Starting off with the texturing design, and as you can see, the entire figure is covered with a lot of sculpted texturing, which is really cool because this is probably the best approach of translating that CGI model with the very realistic looking fur into plastic. If you care about accuracy, then this is not a figure that you would want, because at that point, you're going to have to buy something like Hot Toys if they were to ever make any of these characters from the movie into figures, because that one-to-one is not a cheap thing to make, right? But in the way that Jax chose to go about with this figure with the sculpted texturing, I think was the best approach. And you can see that even in the red parts of the patterns of his fur, it is also visible, right? Which is very nice, even on the ears. Even this fur patch right here in the middle of his torso, which has a different color, is done nicely in terms of sculpt. And then looking at his legs, you can see those details as well. So yeah, overall, these sculpted details with the texturing is just done really nicely, and I really like that about these live action movie figures. And moving on to the next detail, it would be his eyes. Now, when it comes to the mainline Sonic figures, most of the eyes are just printed on. There's no plastic lens over the eyes. But for the live action movie figures, I really love how they added this plastic lens to give the eyes this sort of three-dimensional depth, which is kind of similar to mimicking what their eyes look like in their, CGI model. So that's pretty cool. Love the execution of that. Another detail that also stands out with the sculpt of this figure would be this detail right here with his gloves. You can see that this is painted in this sort of gold color with some red and black. And this same detail is also visible on this side of his arm, as well as the top part of his feet right here, and the sculpting of his shoes. Honestly, these are probably the best looking shoes I've ever seen for a fictional character. I love the way they look. Even the bottom of them, you can see that they're like thrusters of some kind. There's this really cool part in the movie where, he rides his motorcycle all the way up to the top of a building, and he launches himself up there, right? Because him and Sonic are having like this clash, and he basically, does this like jump like this way, like diving down, which is really freaking cool. So yeah, really love the sculpting of his shoes and the way that they look. And that's pretty much most of the aesthetics for Shadow here. It's very simple, but it works. I love the way his character look. He's always been one of my favorite characters because of just the fact that he's kind of like this dark, gritty character, and that's why I have a bias for Shadow. And before we move on to the articulation, let's bring in his super form, because I do want to show the differences between them. And as you can see, the only differences is really just the colors. Everything else is exactly identical when it comes to the look here. So yeah, it's really nice to have, both forms for Shadow, the base form and also the super form. This is such a cool thing to just have in my collection. Now, let's move on to the articulation. Starting with the articulation of his head sculpt, he can turn his head left and right. He can tilt his head side to side. He can't really look up all the way. He can barely look down. So in terms of his articulation with the head sculpt, it does have some restrictions. And for his arm, He can lean him out this much. I think my copy of the figure is still really new, so a lot of the joints don't want to work. Okay, there we go. So that's as much as it will go out. And then he can also swing them back and forth with no problems. Okay, it does get tangled in there, but it should be able to swing back and forth technically. Let's try that. Okay, there we go. It works. He does have a single jointed articulation in the arm. There is a swivel with that joint, as you can see. There's also a bicep cut right here. There's also butterfly articulation, that whole thing. And then for his hands, he does have wrist articulation. He does have swivel. He does have finger articulation, as you can see right there. And then for his torso, he does have a rotation on the bottom right here, which is very limiting. It doesn't really, like, move out much. Oh, he can actually lean back a little bit. That's surprising. Okay, so that works. But that's about it with the torso articulation. And for his legs, he can do the splits, as you can see. Yeah. They're kind of, like, tight on my copy of the figure right now because the joints are not, like, super loose. So I don't want to break this. He does have die cut swivels right there. He also has articulation in the legs. There is a rotation right there as well. There's also a rotation down here with his feet. Actually, no, it's not a rotation. It's a swivel where it just rocks, you know, side to side like this. Not a rotation. Correction. And then he also has articulation like that. And that is pretty much most of the articulation for Shadow. And let's move on to some comparisons. For the first comparison, here he is once again next to his super form, just to give you a better look of what they look like together. Not bad. And for the next comparison, here he is next to the light-up version that came with the Target exclusive 4-pack. And I will, of course, have a review for this in the future, because there are some slight differences between these two figures in the way that they are engineered and all that stuff. So, and of course, the gimmick here is the light-up thing, which you can't really see that great because of the lighting of my review station right now, but there it is. And for the next comparison, here he is next to Sonic. And the two of them are not bad next to each other, right? So there's that. Here he is with Knuckles. And Knuckles is slightly taller than Shadow. There's that comparison. And for the final comparison, here he is next to Tails. Hopefully he does not fall over. Okay, there we go. He is actually standing. And he is a lot taller than Tails. So there is the comparison between Shadow and Tails. And that will wrap up the comparison section for today's review. And if you found today's review of Shadow from the Sonic 3 movie informative, do give this video a like. If you want to subscribe to the channel for more action figure content and whatever else I do on here, it would be much appreciated. And with that said, take care, and I will see you in the next video.